only child on the west side of Detroit. Went to several Detroit public schools, graduated from Romulus in 2011. I went to Wayne State, got my undergrad, my BS in criminal justice, graduated in 15. I've been a police officer since 2016, spent a couple years in Detroit. Then I went out to Dearborn Heights. It was definitely two different experiences, definitely night and day, I'd say the least. I mean, definitely when you go into it, I mean, just another one of those, I'll say, you know, we all like to talk about the armor of God and our war is not against flesh and blood, but just literally seeing the different perspective, seeing the spiritual side of things. You know, for example, you know, working in Detroit and just knowing the history of the people in Detroit, the brokenness, the poverty, the fatherlessness, the racism, the corruption, and actually seeing the spirit of anger, hatred, and you coming in there and you're being seen by some as just an additional layer to the problem. Seeing young guys that look like you that are hesitant to talk to you, you know that it's not you, it's what you represent, but it's underlying, it's the history behind what you represent. So knowing that allows me to be more gracious, and it allows me to actually maneuver and handle certain situations differently, having that perspective and that wisdom. And I felt like it was a point in time where, you know, when I was in my lonesome, I got to a place where I started to deceive myself and just feeling that I was alone. I was the only person going through what I went through. And especially with, you know, Ahmaud Arbery and even George Floyd being both a black man and a black officer, you see both sides of it. You know, on one side, you know, me as a man, I like to run, I like to jog. So I see it as, you know, that could have definitely been me. And even in my studies at Wayne State, you know, finishing up my master's and doing my extensive research, you know, studies have shown that, you know, police do use more aggressive tactics towards individuals who live in more inner city, impoverished communities compared to individuals who live in the suburbs, or just towards African Americans and compared to whites overall. You know, if blacks and whites commit the same crimes, a black person is more likely to get a more harsher sentence than an individual who's white, who's more likely to get a lesser sentence. A black child who acts out is more likely to be seen as just a troubled youth or deviant, and compared to, you know, a white child who's just seen as someone who's having a rough day and who's having troubles at home. So just putting that into perspective, during quarantine, I was wrestling with the fact that that could be me at any given time. I mean, it says in Proverbs 18:2, it says, you know, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only delights in airing his own opinions. I mean, even seeing it on the other side, you know, as being an officer, and even certain shootings, such as Rashard Brooks and even Jacob Blake, being an officer again, doing everything right and things still not going wrong, you know, that applies to the other side. I mean, we've got our use of force continuum that we follow, and it's like, if a subject reacts in one of 5 ways, we're told to combat in one of 5 ways, but everything's not black and white, because throughout our use of force continuum and throughout use of force continuums around, it says across the top, totality of the circumstances. So not everything's black and white. You know, it's been times where I fought somebody who was 5 foot, $120, high off narcotics, and he literally picked me up on my belt buckle, my vest, and slammed me on the ground. And I almost had to take his life based on those circumstances. But that's something that people don't know. You know, I had people, Christian and non-Christian, you know, ask me, you know, well, how do you feel with everything going on? But half the time it wasn't asking about my well-being. It was more so from a sense of, you know, what side are you on? And like, it's not about sides. And I've experienced, the cold shoulder from some, the subtle passive aggressiveness, not necessarily because of me, but because of what I represent. The best thing we can do is listen. I mean, it's so easy that it's difficult for many people to do. I mean, people talk about defunding the police. I ask people like, what does that look like to you? But nobody can give me anything set in stone. Everyone's emotional and it's just a knee-jerk reaction. Because Jesus said in Luke 6, it's not what goes inside of a man that defiles him, but it's what comes out, because what comes out comes from the heart. So at the end of the day, you can defund me in whatever ways that looks like to you. But if I'm prejudiced and I'm biased, you can strip me of my gun, my baton, my taser, my vest. But if I've got hate in my heart, nothing's gonna stop me from putting my knee in somebody else's neck, regardless of my equipment. I mean, I tell people, who try to say, okay, well, put a social worker in certain circumstances where we have cops. Okay, well, I'll give you 100 different scenarios of where we dealt with the mental population or where we had welfare checks, and I'll give you 100 different outcomes. Okay, not everything's black and white. The first time I got stabbed working in Detroit was dealing with a mental individual, and she was calm and she snapped like that. It went from her and I laughing to her picking up a butcher knife and stabbing me in the vest. Thank God for vests. So let's say you put a social worker in that situation instead of a police officer, and she gets stabbed or he gets stabbed, then what? I mean, we got to put ourselves aside. We got to put our emotions aside. And I get it's tough, but it's greater than us. And even being a young black officer, I got to put that aside, because that's not where my identity is. First, I'm a child of God. Then I'm a black man. Then I'm an officer. I got those things mixed up for a while. Okay, my identity is in Christ first, and through that, I can be the man who called me to be. I can be the officer he called me to be. In him, we do good works. I was in a tough place, a place full of pruning and just chastising. I was in a dark place. I mean, I wasn't in too much community. I mean, it was via Zoom, but I had points where, I mean, it does say in Hebrews 10:25 to not neglect meeting up, as some of us are in the habit of doing, but do so all the day more, so that your heart does not become hardened to the deceitfulness of sin. I mean, at the end of the day, it's got to point back to Christ. We have to stay connected to the church. It's all about Christ. It has to, regardless of the circumstances, of your political ideology, of your race. It's got to point back to the one, because he's the only one who can give us the freedom that we need. I mean, it sounds cliche, but I mean, we're living in a time where people are turning to things and other individuals to give them what only Christ can. We're like each other's mirrors. So with the mirror, your brother or sister can see the things that you can't see. We need mirrors to point out the flaws that you can't see within yourself. We need mirrors to go throughout our daily lives, because when you don't have that community or those mirrors, you deceive yourself, because the heart above all else is deceitful, and you believe that everything is well, and you can't see the things that the next person can see. You start to believe the lie that, well, it is only me going through this like I did. Well, no one else is struggling, no one else understands, and that's what cripples you. When you start to believe that you're the only person that's going through this, then the devil has a foothold on you. It was a Wednesday midweek service. Pastor Sonny spoke. He spoke out of John 1:46. When Philip went to tell Nathanael about encountering Jesus, and Nathanael replied, what good could come out of Nazareth? And Pastor Sonny talked about, what are those underlying biases that we all hold? And that night after service, we connected. And fast forward 2 years later, December of 2018, I reached out to Sonny and said, hey, you've been on my mind. He was like, hey, brother, I was thinking about you too. Let's connect. and I've been rocking with him ever since. It's bigger than us at the end of the day, and we've got people walking dead, and we've got the hope that they need. We've got the antidote to the sickness. You know, people dying inwardly day by day. So we've got to get to a point in ourselves where we're rooted and we look within ourselves, and you know, we get past the physicality, because it's spiritual. It's a spiritual war going on, and I get it. It's easier said than done, but it's not about us. I mean, I think back to where I was before I became a Christian. It was a white brother, a brother who didn't look like me, who came and preached the gospel to me more than once. A man who grew up on the opposite side of the pillow, who put aside his differences, who had enough love in Jesus in him to come to me. A young black guy from the west side of Detroit, night and day, to literally sit and be consistent and meeting up with me to give me the hope that I needed. So you're telling me that I can't do the same for my brothers and sisters? I mean, we got to put ourselves aside. We got to put our emotions aside. And I get it's tough, but it's greater than us.